Hey everybody, it's Booksy, and this is an update for November 26th, which was a half trading day, the day after Thanksgiving. We're going to be looking at AMC and basically talking about um, what I think is going on. And today's going to be a weird one. I have to kind of go backwards before I can go forward. There's something that is going to come up that's probably going to frustrate some people who just don't allow room for changing your mind about stuff. If I were to stick to my guns all the time and not make room to be flexible, a lot of people will respect that. But if there's a certain point where you know that if it's not working, you have to go back and reevaluate, right? And that's what happened here with these t-tests. And we got the test based on where I thought we needed to go with the first catch. And from there, I thought, well, we got to go up, right? Because you got the T3, right? And the T3 is this section right here. If you've never watched this before, basically the T's were ones that confused me before. I thought that the main purpose of them was to sort of establish a bottom, but originally I suspected they were to test this region. And because of what just happened with AMC, I went back and reevaluated, and I found that really they test this first catch, and that the second catch is more to like slow it down so that we can go through here methodically after we do this kind of pump and dump thing. And this has happened in this stock multiple times, so it was something that was pretty easy to test. Like I went back and looked at the first catch, the second catch, and this one's real ugly. But basically I found that, yeah, pretty much the T's always kind of retest these regions between the first and the second catch, and it starts with the first. And sometimes it'll go below it. Sometimes it'll never go below the lowest point, like as in here. And sometimes it goes below it. So I was like, well, maybe what we're seeing here, if you look at this region, okay, is actually this region. And somebody said to me on like Twitter that doesn't this right here look a lot more reasonable, like that this is actually right here, the sell-off is actually where we are. And sure, like if you just look at it from a glance, I would agree, like, yeah, it's pretty close. I mean, it looks, we're looking at this right here versus this right here. And so then you could say, well, maybe when this caught and ran up, that it was all part of the catch, and that the catch is this whole region right here, and that after the catch, you go down, and it's really just getting down to the bottom. That's all that matters. And once you hit the bottom, then you start your t-tests. Right, hit the bottom, you start the t-test. And I said in a few videos ago, I said I didn't think that was the case because fractals do have markers. They do have repeating markers that you can see. And when I looked at the markers here for like this, for example, right, and then this right here. So you have this one that looks like a little volcano top, and then you've got this kind of dome-shaped one, right? And I looked at that and I said, to me, the volcano-shaped top and the dome are the t-tests, and that this whole section right here, which we watched play out, and we did watch it play out, was this section right here. And we mapped it all the way to here, this M point. And M was like right around, I want to say here, something like that. And then we saw this little shape and a drop, this little shape and a drop, and then we ended up running into T1. And to me, I looked at this and I said, there's no possible way, like at least at the time I was thinking there's no way that we're in that stage where we're just kind of cascading down either here or here. We have to already be in the t-tests, but the t-test would mean then that you are going to go to T3. And so what was the expectation for today heading into T3? So like this is where we were, okay, where we were saying like this is not all the catch is here, and the reason we broke out of the catch upward, right, which is not typical, broke upward, okay, is because we were in basically, just kind of some new territory and that this right here, this 1, 2, 3 down that we saw on a micro level here was happening on a macro level here. It was really like 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, right? And after we hit this bottom right here, which, you know, I called it out, but that doesn't really matter. The point is, like, I knew this was going to be a bottom because we know that the t-tests, the point of them was to test this previous region, this previous catch zone. But, and then this to me was like, you know, the B4, the base, the bottom, the bounce. And sometimes you see that the B4 comes up about halfway. You kind of see it here. It's not halfway. It did right there. Then there was another one. And if you go back to some other previous tests, like back here, you see this like hard red line, and this ended up being a test that the T2 ended up bouncing off of. So I looked at this region right here as a comparison, and I started looking at this section. This is just like a recap. Okay, I looked at this section, the T3, and then I also looked at this other section for T3. And this one was a little harder to do because you can't really see a strong bounce here. There's no clear like bottom. It's kind of rattling around a bit. But regardless, I looked at these two sections as, you know, these are the areas that we should be looking at because these are the T3 tests here and here. And if this is all one big cell, and by the way, you see this walk down happen here too, okay, which is what I was seeing in this. Well, I saw it right here. Then I thought, well, we must be in this section. And so I started looking at this section specifically, the fractal for this section, and it actually matched pretty much 1-to-1 with a lot of the things we saw here. You can't see it on the 15-minute. But again, you kind of have that weird volcano shape. And when I looked over here, I saw it, you know, it's right here. There's this volcano shaped thing. There's this hard cell after, right? And I know that it's flatter, but there's the hard cell. And then if you were to map the different kind of points, you see it kind of leading up. And so my expectation was that we were kind of essentially, if we're looking only at this fractal, we were basically like right here. Like we hadn't quite gotten any sort of a boost. I think it was more like here, right? We hadn't really gotten a boost. And I was expecting more downside. And so I took a line. I said, well, if you look, this downside broke over here. And again, I'm not going to go back through all of this. I said, but you know, this is pretty obvious that this downside, it broke beneath, it retested some other levels, and then it went back up. So today, what we were looking for was this downside, right? This break beneath, back up into this sort of a cup, all right? So my thought was that something like this was going to happen today. And I said that it's probably going to go down, and you can go back to the other video if you want to check it out. I said it's probably going to go down. I didn't think it was going to go down as far as it did. I said that if I look at this, I'm thinking maybe this is the trend line, and this is all conjecture, right? This is just me looking at previous patterns saying this is what I think might happen. All right, and I said maybe if it needs to go down far, it'll come down beyond this to maybe this one. I said I don't think it'll come all the way down here. But the reason I said that is because after it bounced here, it stayed up. It didn't immediately like fall back through. And a lot of people were talking about the diamond pattern and the fact that there was this sort of even if you look at this as sort of like a symmetrical wedge where you're not really sure which direction up or down it's going to break. So it causes a lot of uncertainty. And then we have a gap day, right? We have Thanksgiving, and there's no trading for a whole day between this, like within this line. And now we're back to where we are. So if you haven't been following, that's where we are right now. So then the question becomes, well, did I just get it completely wrong? And my answer is, I don't really know for sure yet. I think that there's a few different options right now. So one option is let's say if that's what we were looking for, and we were thinking, I thought max pain, and even those that didn't believe that this fractal is real, everybody kind of thought like we were going to set up around right under 40 for max pain. And I don't think almost anybody, except for those maybe doing Elliott wave, were expecting anything other than just sort of an up to 40 motion here. And I said, I don't think it needs to come down. I said, if the market makers want it to come down, maybe it will. And I thought maybe back here. This is what I was thinking, that back here we would come down, finish it out. And you remember I drew like the 1, 2, 3 down here, and I thought that's what might happen. It didn't happen. So I thought, well, maybe that door is closed. Well, it's not closed, right? And so the question now is like, where are we, right? And you can't really tell with any kind of fractal like this, but let's say, for instance, this is what was supposed to, not supposed to, but let's say this would have happened on a normal T3, and then you just shift it down. You could make the argument that this right here, I know it doesn't look the same verticality-wise, right? And I'm not going to sit here and tell you use your imagination, but like you can see that it formed a little bit of a cup, but it's already sort of forming like another downtrend. So one possibility of today's price action is that we're still seeing, this is one possibility. All right, so possibility one, we're just seeing an offset of T3. And we do have, by the way, a huge influx of volume as a result of this drop. One piece of evidence for this is if you look, where was it? Back in, well, I'm not going to be able to go back that far. We'll get to a piece of evidence for like why that might be possible today. But basically, like sometimes this stock will have a corrective move that is purely just to kind of put the algorithm where it needs to be. So let's say that when this happened, when this sell-off happened, maybe it was supposed to kind of, instead of going up like this, maybe the catch was supposed to go more sideways and then down. And then our t-test would have been over here, but instead, because of the way the algorithm was set up, he gives us these kind of false hope peaks and then comes down, and it just played it differently. Like that's a possibility. But if you look at something like this, you can make the argument that the only reason this run happened right here, this particular liquidity test right in this area, is because of this, like this massive sell-off, right? That then caused this massive run-up in consolidation. And if you were to just kind of erase that, I just want you to look for a second, okay? Like, look at that. I mean, there's nothing really complex about this. I mean, you look at it, it was kind of running on its own little trend line down, but this massive push down caused a massive push up. Now, that didn't happen today. We saw a massive push down, we saw a quick rebound in the morning, and then it just kind of rattled around a bit. And that brings me to my next point, which is that this right here, in and of itself, could be explained if, for instance, we were to see on Monday, let's say that we see on Monday this. Okay, like there's this sort of dip, and then after the dip, we get this push up, and it doesn't have to go all the way up here, but let's just say that bull action causes this to just sort of run on Monday. If this were to happen on Monday, I would just very simply say that the T's just were manipulated in a way, and because I'm mapping it, not because I just feel like it should fit, but because I went through this painstakingly and mapped out these things, and they do map almost 1-to-1. So one option is that the T's are just shifted down, and the reason that we were shifted down far is because this run-up isn't going to break out right away. Maybe it doesn't, right? And maybe it does this instead, and then it comes back down and retests. So there's one option for you. This would make sense because this would put us right back around that $40 level. The other option has to do with the fractal that I found, okay, which is called, I'm calling it the thankful fractal. All right, and if you were to go back in time, all the way back here, back when we all were really young in this stock, 7 months ago or whatever, back into June, this section right here, I want you to just kind of look. If you look at this on the whole, this is a pretty complete fractal from here to here, and that's the way that I saw it. But if you look at it closely, and you've probably picked up on this already, is that these fractals typically have a head and shoulder pattern, right, between the two catches. But you will sometimes see a head and shoulder sort of appear out of nowhere, right? Or a suggested head and shoulder. It's a very common pattern on the stock. And so you see something like this, and you're ready for it to kind of sell off. But I looked at this and I saw to myself, you know, that's kind of interesting. I'm gonna see if I can map it. And I saw this right here. And I said to myself, that looks like a T3. Because T3 is very typically like either something like this or something like this, where you get this kind of run up that essentially, you know, it consolidates and then it becomes like a platform, whether it's like a bowl shape, which is pretty common, or if it's just like a wedge. So I decided to map it out. And what I found is what I'm calling the thankful fractal. I'm calling it the Thanksgiving fractal, basically. And it's because I found it on Thanksgiving. I was goofing off. We had eaten our food. We were all kind of sleepy, and I came and poked around on the stocks for a bit. And I'm going to look at it on the 15-minute, just to give you some perspective on it. Basically, this fractal happens within a larger cycle. All right, a much larger cycle, several month cycle. And this is, in this case, from June 10th to June 22nd. So this is very quick. This is basically 12 trading days. I'm not sure exactly how many it is. Maybe less, actually. It's 1, 2, there's a weekend. Okay. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 trading days. So in 9 trading days, it ran through the entire fractal cycle. And you get stuff like the R1 liquidity test here. You get the R3. I mean, it's pretty much all there. The R2, the R3. You get all the major touch points. You know, you get a double bottom, like down here, if you were to zoom in, there's like 2 bottoms. Really, actually, no, this is the, yeah, no, this is correct. I had it right. The point is that this is all here. And then if you were to look at this is definitely the B4. The B4, the point of the B4 is to get you back. See that? Get you back to where you were. So all of this is just a big waste of time. It means nothing. And it's just about getting people on board or shaking out people and basically making a buck on the way up and on the way down. And then if you look at that, this is a bounce into another catch, and it starts another kind of head and shoulders. It's kind of weak into another catch, and then we have a little T-test. And then the pattern kind of falls apart. I don't really see it anymore. And I kind of was like, I don't see this as like a T3 and an R1. There's not really a lot of volume there, but you do get some liquidity spikes that sort of pop up right out of nowhere. And I would say those are probably your R1, 2, and 3 tests stretched out over time. But that basically the main reason that this happened wasn't to do an upward motion, it was to do a downward motion. So it was stretched out and you get this really long, see this cascading bounce here? Get this really long cascading bounce. And so my thought was, well, if you took this fractal and stretched it out, you probably maybe turned it sideways and squished it a little, you'd see that it's probably the same thing. And it's got all kinds of head and shoulders in here, right? Little fake outs before the drops. And eventually you head back down to the bigger B4 test of the larger macro fractal, right? Which is down here and then into the catch. And you might even consider this the B4 if you look at it more like we started here, okay? It depends on where you draw your T1, but it basically, like, it doesn't really make any difference. B4 is this region here because it's establishing the base, the bottom again. If you look at this is more aligned with B1. If you look at this base, it's more aligned with the T's. And sometimes it's more about getting back to where you started with the T's. And I think that's fair, but it does shift slightly. So this being said, I found a fractal within the bigger fractal. And I know this is a possibility. I already knew this was something that could happen, all right? And the reason that this could happen is mainly because fractals will repeat inside of themselves. And I'm not going to get into that just yet. I'm going to do a different video series on the fractals and those relationships. But basically, imagine if you took this fractal, copied and pasted it, and put it along this line right here. Like imagine you took this, you did a copy paste, and you put it here and you turned it sideways, right? Like that's kind of the way that fractals can work sometimes. So the idea there is also that you're kind of losing it. You kind of lose the fractal. You lose the pattern. And it does. It throws you off. You think you're in one place and you're really not. And I want you to imagine, let's say, for instance, we had known the fractal pattern way back then. Let's say whether I or myself or somebody else had figured it out and we were all like watching this happen. What do you think everybody would have thought when we got here to the R1, knowing that this is what happened last time? Right? We get to these t-tests. We know the volume's not the same, but we think it's going to happen again. Well, probably we would have thought that R1 was going to look a lot like this because we're ready to go. Everybody wanted it to go up, and it would just go up. And this would just look like a big old bull pennant. Do you remember the bull pennant? We're starting to get into like the psychology of these plays. Because I remember this, and I remember thinking this was a big old bull pennant. And I remember thinking that this looked like a fake breakdown of sorts, and that when we got here, we were just going to keep going up. And truth be told, I think that if this were like a normal stock, I think we might have seen this maybe bounce, maybe we would go up, but I think that a lot of people were thinking this was going to be the second run. When we got here, it was just going to keep going, right? And I remember this time, and I remember redrawing this bull pennant over and over and over again. And then people started saying what? Like TA doesn't work on this stock. And everybody was saying, no, it doesn't work. Every time we draw something, it just breaks through. And eventually, though, here we are 7 or 8 months later and a whole lot wiser. And we know that this is, in fact, a gigantic drawn-out consolidation or wedge pattern. And I did point out that if you do all of the dates of the SI publishing, you will see that basically it always returns back to the same price point. It's something like right here. And every time we were like getting close to those publishing dates, almost always we're like right where we need to be. Meaning like the publishing dates were on these markers where it crosses, which is very sus, right? We know that that's something that obviously they're trying to create a beta neutral situation. I know Astro's talked a lot about that on his stream. Or even a beta negative, right? Where it looks like we're going against other stocks in the broader market. And the other thing that's happening is we also have these, it's called a GFC, but it's basically these futures expirations. And we see these run-ups anytime we typically are running up anytime there's a push. Now, right now, we're not doing that, not yet. And I think this is part of the reason why why I was saying that I couldn't see this not being the T's, and this is why perhaps we saw this kind of push up, right? And I'm not saying it was a fake out. I am saying that it may have been, but I am saying that typically we see that as we're moving towards these rollover dates, we are on an uptrend. Well, that's not happened so far. We've been on a downtrend. And this is kind of throwing people kind of for a loop, just a little bit. But again, that was like another supporting factor is that, hey, we've got an R1 coming up. These are big liquidity tests. If we get this T3 out of the way, the R1 might start running, and we might then from there, after we get out of this wedge, keep going up, at least until we get to, and I know it's not on here, but at least till we get to, I think it's like December 10th, right, is the next one. And then that would be like, oh, maybe we start selling off. I was thinking maybe around 50. I'm not saying we don't get there. I'm just saying like, that's what my thinking was at the time. So why am I bringing all this up? Well, it's important to understand that this right here tells me something about this stock, which is that the fractals that are within it are not only repeating in part, but they're repeating in whole. And my guess is that if you were looking at this fractal really in a close, like high detailed way, which is kind of what I've been doing, we're probably going to find other instances of this fractal in a micro way, all right? And that certain liquidity tests, like we looked at this right here, this is an R2, right? But this also is the same as this. If you look at the Thanksgiving, see, it matches up. So it's like two overlapping fractals that are accomplishing one goal. And I know that hurts your brain. It hurts my brain too a little bit because I'm not a computer algorithm. I can't think like that. But then that got me thinking because one thing that I was having trouble really reconciling here was just this idea of these t-tests being so bizarre, right? And surely if if the whole point of the t-test was to get to the bottom, then maybe this is what happened, and it needed to correct, right? And so that's why it looks so weird, and the fractal got stretched and manipulated, and that happens. We know that it happens. It happened right here with the sideways fractal, right? Like this fractal right here is super weird. If you like look at it and the shape of it, it's like a big, round bowl, okay? And it happens like that sometimes, but not usually completely, right? You wouldn't call this whole action right here a big bowl, but that's what happened right here. And this is almost like not even important, but this was part of the catch. And that happened within another fractal. See that? So it was stretched. It was like somebody put it on a piece of fabric, right? Or a ribbon, and then just like bent it the way that they wanted to bend it. And that to me is really mind-boggling. So I'm looking at this and I'm starting to look at whether or not I can zoom out and if this is another kind of fractal, and that we actually had a repeat. My assumption was, and here's where I'm going with this. My assumption was that because of the fact that this right here basically lined up with this, that they were somehow the same part of the fractal. And that this and this, right, these two sections were the major ones. So I think I had drawn like, if we were looking at these lines, I had drawn something like this where I thought that was the one, that was the other. And what I'm about to show you is going to hurt your brain a little bit and maybe your confidence, but I do think that it's important to just recognize that sometimes we don't have the whole picture, and when you get more information, you apply it. The whole reason I shared this with the community was to try to get help, and I'm not getting a whole lot of help. I'm gonna be honest. I've gotten a lot more people who are just looking to disprove it because they've seen too many of these things come and go, and I'm looking at it like, no, this is it. I mean, I'm finding this fractal in different places. This is the fractal that we need to look at. And a lot of people are just like, no, it doesn't matter, or it's going to get disproven, and anything that I do seems like confirmation bias. So what I'm about to do is going to look like confirmation bias, but I'm telling you that this is 100% a possibility that the two fractals can coexist at the same time. It happened here, all right, and I think it's happening right now. And so we have this fractal, and I've already taken a picture of it. I put it over here. All right, this is it. This is kind of where I'm going. Ignore that, it doesn't matter. But you get the point. This is it, right? And we know that these match. This T1, T3, or T1, T2, T3. I don't know why I put T3 there. That's supposed to be T2. These match up. All right, they match the microfractals, all right, pretty darn well. So they look correct. But what if this right here, which does touch the top, what if that is one of these major fractals? It's not like, what if this head and shoulder here, right here, is not this head and shoulder? It's actually this one. What would that mean? And does it mean that there's two fractals going on simultaneously? And is that why we kind of did this weird like halfway lift thing here where we kind of floated off into the air instead of just kind of going normal like sideways? Well, the first piece of evidence that I took up on was the fact that this touched the top, and none of these other midway ones did. They're very low. They're almost like, basically like you can see like the distance from the top here, right, is pretty significantly lower. And this one is not. It's like right on the top. So I thought, well, I guess I have to try it, and I did. And so this is what I found. Essentially what I looked at was I went to this over here, and I looked at the different stages, okay? And I know there's some like weird, bizarre looking stuff going on here. Get rid of some of these extra fractals, okay? I'll talk about these in a second. But if you look here, and you might be thinking, wait a second, this looks like, right, it is. This is, in fact, you know, if you look at this, let's go to like a 15-minute here. Okay, and let's go to one that's sort of easier to read. Maybe this one. All right, and ignore this for just a minute. I'll just put it over here for now. All right, and I just want you to kind of stare at this with me for just a second and just kind of consider what it is I'm proposing here. Basically, what I'm looking at is a different possibility, that this was a sell-off. This right here, this bounce, was actually a first bounce into an R4. There was another bounce into a bigger R4, which is this one. Or excuse me, B4. So there were two B4s. One is right here, and one is right here. One creates a smaller wedge that's almost indistinguishable. Looks like just part of the price action. Another creates this big one. This price action becomes a wedge and a catch. But this one actually turns itself into a, and this is where I'm going to lose some people. I don't want to do that. But this one actually turns itself into a head and shoulders pattern. Okay. Because if you look closely and check this out, this is really bizarre. Look at this weird sell-off here. See that? Isn't that weird? I think that's really odd, because if you were to look at this fractal, let's say you thought this was the R4, or the B4, I'm sorry, and it bounced, right? And you're starting this consolidation, which we would consider the wedge. What would you expect to have happen next? You would expect a head and shoulders pattern. And you might think that's not a head and shoulders, but if you look, it is a head and shoulders. And this is where I'm getting my head kind of exploding a little bit, is that this certainly is a head and shoulders pattern. It's not conventional, right? We have like a higher rise, but just look at it, right? You were to draw a line here, you would see it's like a rising head and shoulders pattern. And what's really odd is that in order to have this head and shoulders happen where it did, like keeping it below this like $41, okay, 10th, yeah, then you have this big drop which causes it to happen, and then it lets you push it down further. So if you look at it this way, basically this was essentially like contrived. It looks contrived, right? It looks like it's made up in order to get this head and shoulder. But then look at this. There is that head and shoulder right there, that kind of sideways riding head and shoulder. It actually acts as the B4 for this larger schematic, not this weird small one that seemed to be forming. So from this point on, my thesis has changed. I'm just saying, this is why I'm going to look at it, because I did this and it works. And it's hurt my brain a little bit, but I think I understand why it works. Because these things can run simultaneously. All right? They do not have to be distinct, like mutually exclusive. We saw it with that other fractal. It's not. You can put an entire fractal inside of another. And so if that's the case, and there's two running basically simultaneously, and one is seeming to run faster than the other, that would explain a lot of this strange kind of price action that we're seeing. And I'm not saying they're bouncing between two different ones. I am saying, though, that they're basically accomplishing the same task by playing out two different fractal patterns at the same time. So one fractal pattern is, if you want to imagine it this way, is following this from here forward. Okay? Let's draw a little arrow. I don't want that one. I want the regular arrow. Regular arrow. There we go. One is basically from here forward. All right, and that's the first one that we were looking at. Another one is playing from basically like, if you look at it, it's also playing from there forward, but it's more like on a macro scale. So it's playing from like back here through all the way through here. All right. That's super confusing. And I know some people are going to say, hey, you're doing mental gymnastics to make this work, but I'm telling you that this actually makes a lot of sense of the price action. If you look at this, the price action made a lot of sense up until this point. It mostly made sense up until this point, but even this, I mean, look how eerily similar it is to the normal sort of top head and shoulder pattern, where you have this like massive sell, see that? And then a bounce, right? And then you kind of start selling off and bouncing down towards the, in this case, towards over here, towards the B4. So I looked at this and I decided I would try to map it. And sure enough, if you look at it, this is another catch down here. This would be like the blue catch. I didn't make it blue. But yeah, this totally works, and it's not even that hard to do. I mean, I just looked for it. And there is a T1, a T2, and the T2 has the markers of that cone-shaped T2 with a 1, 2, 3 pattern. T3 is like a little rise and a platform that runs into an R1, which is, look at this, major liquidity test. Okay. And then we have all the rest there. And then what's odd is that instead of just dropping down, so let's say we were looking at a normal, and this is where I'm kind of going with this. If you look at a normal one, look at what happens here. It drops down, right? And it sometimes goes sideways a bit and then falls. And that's sort of what's going on, right? But it doesn't look the same, does it? You could say that, well, this is just and it is, it's like an Elliott wave. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is what was pointed out to me by someone in the Discord, is that the Elliott wave was consistent, like it stayed there. And where we see that 5-wave Elliott wave is on these larger head and shoulder patterns. Not so much on these ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe you could argue you always see it there too, but you know, I'm looking at it like, well, I guess you know, you wouldn't say it here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like that doesn't really work, right? But this is another head and shoulder right here on the fractal. So, all right. So I know I'm going to lose some folks because this is confusing. But basically, we've got two different fractals at the same time. So while these do match T1 and T2, they also match, basically, they also match what would become like a move towards B4, essentially. Okay, like a move towards B4. And though there are some comparisons you can draw, really the best way to look at it would be to look at all of the different moves from the top of a head and shoulders and see how they play into, right? Like how do they play into the B4 move? And so what I did is I went back and I looked at a few different ones, and you do see, with some consistency, you do see these sort of platformings happen, right? Where you kind of are cascading down and then it sort of platforms for a bit. And if you were to go back here and look at some of these, I mean, these are kind of like that too, right? You kind of hit and you consolidate, hit and consolidate, right? And they don't look exactly the same. This one's pretty close, actually. You see this hit, and then there's this U shape, and then you consolidate, and then we have like this hit, this U shape, you sell off, and then consolidate. But the point is not like to make these perfect one-to-one comparisons. It's more to just look at like the pattern on the whole and just say, where are we in this, and what can we understand better from it? So if you look at this one, it has like a couple different plateaus. There's one here before it goes down hard. You might consider that to be maybe like this is just like a stepping stone. This is like the rise here, and then it kind of like arcs down, bounces, it goes flat. You see that right there? And it comes down hard, and it goes flat, and then it comes down hard. And if that were the case, we might expect to see something like this afterwards. Now, it doesn't have to be this big, and it really wasn't, right? Then we go back to today. And if you look at today, I already took this fractal here. I actually flipped it upside down. This is the fractal from the last drop into a orange wedge. It doesn't look like this, does it? But if you invert it, guess what? You know, it's pretty much the same. So I don't think that it's going to follow this like exactly, but I do think that this is probably what's going on and why everything is super confusing. And look at even this right here, like this action, you know, and again, you got to take it with a grain of salt. This could be super compressed. It doesn't have to be exact. And if it's inverted on the first drop, it might not be inverted all the way, right? It might switch back. And that's what's really confusing about these fractals and why nobody really follows up with them, because they just kind of assume it's broken, it doesn't work. So if I were to guess, there's only one of two things that can happen now, right? In my opinion, okay? Well, there's three things. One, the first is what the fella on Twitter was saying, is that if this is just this section where you're kind of bobbling and then you fall to the bottom, bobbling and then you fall to the bottom, that we're going to see a T1, T2, T3 down here. Don't like that one because, again, these fractals don't really make sense in that sequence, and then this whole area does not line up with one of those little fallen bobbles after those middle head and shoulders. It does, however, make some sense within the B4 action. I went back to B4. I looked at areas, okay, and that little volcano that we see, let's see if we can really quickly identify one. It happens quite a bit, right? This could be one right here, where it hits, it kind of goes up, creates this cup, and then it falls again. And a lot of times these are like part of a head and shoulders pattern of sorts. But basically, like, I see it as, if you look closely, this right here, see that? It happens quite a bit, where you get this dip, and then there's sort of a flat line, or dip, and then a quick support, and they're just a bunch of like inverse head and shoulders and other things. And then sometimes they form these little like U shapes at the top. It can be very confusing, get lost real easily in the weeds. But basically, I think that's where we are. And so what I think that means is that we're running like two simultaneous fractals. It's very confusing. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But I think it's important because it's going to help us to know, based on what happens, which one is sort of dominant, if you will, in the whole scheme of things, and which one is basically a patsy. You know, it's sort of like just being used to get from A to B, and it might get discarded partway through. That's what happened in that Thankful fractal I showed you. It sort of stopped following the fractal as we would expect, and just kind of went back to like the macro fractal. So if, and I'll make my screen a little bigger for this, if it continues to follow the first fractal that we mapped out, all right, and you're going to have to sort of bear with me on this. This one should not be here. All right, what we're going to see is basically, what we're going to see is this is basically a continuation of T3, and we're going to see our R1. If it is instead following the bigger head and shoulder, then the next step is a head and shoulder, and that means that we're going to see another head and shoulder, probably like this. In either case, I think you're going to see some kind of a dip, maybe to like, you're going to see some kind of a touch point, whether you're going down from up here. I mean, and this could be pretty flat. We don't know. Like, it may not come up all the way. Could do like that, right? I don't know. And that would make sense with this line, right? And then it would break out of that and go. But I think that 40 is definitely like that middle line that they're trying to get back to. So either way, I think they're going to try to get it back to 40 pretty soon. But if we're doing this and it doesn't look like this kind of a liquidity, then I almost guarantee you if it does this rattling on Monday, I can almost guarantee you that we're actually in this other fractal and we're about to see this right here. And then we're going to see the t-tests, the true t-tests, not these like fake guys, into an R1 perhaps, something more like that. Okay. Now, either way, I do think bullishly, we're going to go up. I'm not going to post anything else today, but I just wanted to share this with you. I know it's kind of long, kind of mind-bending, and might irritate some of you. To me, when I look at this and I see opportunities to learn, to understand better, like what might be happening, and to basically just make good guesses, based on what we're given. And as we're given more information, the guesses are going to get better and better and better. And I don't see this as some sort of like dead end. So I don't see it as, once we could lose ourselves and it's over, right? Like it doesn't exist anymore. Because again, you look back in the beginning, and this thing has gotten crazy sometimes, right? And I would never have thought this was all the same as this down here, until I went through and looked at every step. And then I found, oh, there are markers here and they are the same, right? So basically, in conclusion, we're basically running two different fractals at the same time. And then these are not necessarily competing fractals. They might be, but I think one, probably this one, is being used to kind of help complete this one, just like we saw over here. So that being said, hope you all have a good one, and I will catch up with you later.